Thank you.
Approaches, particularly the collaborative one and the confrontational one. And let me just sort of, open up the floor for questions, but before that, for just a minute or so, I just want to try to sort of frame things and put things in a certain context. So in Mexico's case, we see like two different approaches, and I think this is very valuable to learn more about that. And yet, there seems some frustration that this seems to be a long-term battle. I mean, 2.5 years, and still, as you've just said, that this is yet to see any sort of results of that. And so I remember you mentioning sort of the importance of research. And I also maybe want to sort of throw out the issue of EIPI. I mean, as you've mentioned, Francisco. And part of this is really is to also have this conversation about EIPI. To what extent is it a goal by itself or a means? And then what frankly I really like about this panel within the sort of the Lebanese Petroleum Day, it is not only about L.P.A., government, and civil society, but it's also within civil society to have this debate. You know what I mean? And this frank debate about how should we do it. You know what I mean? Yes, it'd be great to do EIPI and other things. Is EIPI the solution? Is it not? Or maybe it's not so much EIPI that is a problem, is how can the actual CSOs within the EIPI framework optimize or deal or push. And that's sort of thing that I think is important for us to put on the table and discuss further, not only here, but in future settings as well. And I think just to also bring to Diana's case in terms of Nigeria, the issue of how the coalitions, I think it's fascinating that through this coalition you see a lot of money foregone, taxes foregone, but thanks to civil society, it's actually being sort of identified and exactly. And Joseph, it's good to hear that L.P.A. is sort of engaging the NDP on the CSR. And I guess my question that I'm going to just throw at you, I sometimes get a feeling that CSR, is it a PR thing or not? Very frankly. And then, okay, if it's not a PR thing, how can civil society really benefit from it? And what's your take on it? And at the same time, you can answer now, or I can take questions from the floor, and then you could sort of, hear your answer. Please go ahead until people sort of, I think, digest their information to prepare questions.
Is CSR by and large a PR exercise? Well, if you actually look globally, and I'm not just talking about the oil and gas sector, but globally with most major corporations, the first key indicator is that the people who manage CSR tend to sit in PR units. So the short answer to your question is in many cases yes. One of the reasons why here in Lebanon we're looking at working with L.P.A. to set up a more structured way of doing CSR, is to actually try and bring those benefits and those resources into a framework that actually provides greater benefits. Now, from a company's point of view, from a sector's point of view, our argument is that engaging with the development benefits that your activities can provide is not a PR exercise, it's not a giveaway. It's actually an intrinsic part of your corporate strategy to ensure the sustainability and resilience of your operations. That unless you can show that the work you're doing in a location, with the community, with the country, provides both direct and indirect benefits to the people who live there, your operation in the long term is on very, very shaky foundations. It's on shaky foundations because whenever a shock occurs, whenever there's social dislocation, whenever something goes wrong, oil spill, a strike, any kind of violence, if you don't have that built-in engagement and positive benefit flows to the community around you, the backlash will be undoubtedly greater. So we argue actually that this kind of engagement should be seen much more in the context of a corporate sustainability and risk management and resilience strategy, rather than being a budget line in the PR that gets given away. And that's the idea of having more regulatory structure, so we can have that kind of discussion about what kind of benefits should flow to the country from the oil and gas sector, and how can companies contribute to that directly themselves, above and beyond what comes to the country through revenue flows to government.
Thank you. Please.
It's fascinating. Thank you so much for this, but I'd like to add something here. I think Pablo also can help me in this part. CSR that you're talking about, I'm going to tell you a little bit now about what the ITI new standard says. it has a great deal now to do with the social impact, and it does require that the companies, if they have paid any form for social corporate responsibility, to be declared. But this is the EITI now, the civil society, and I can now cite an example about what's happening in Iraq, where this is also a requirement. What civil society can do with this information, and this brings me back to your comment earlier on, Sami, is to use this information. We're here talking about the EITI, its benefits. It's only a report. If civil society does not use it, it's simply a report. If you do not know how to read and analyze and act upon the information that is in the report, then to me, EITI is, I'm sorry, it's useless. In order to do that, I can cite now an example from my home country, Iraq. What civil society is currently doing is they are waiting, they know that what the requirements are, they know that there is a social impact part in the EITI, so they know that they are going to read some information about where companies are, through the corporate social responsibility, are feeding into, giving it back to the society. Now what they have done is they have gone down to the sub-community level, and they are now looking at what the community actually needs. Once they have this information, and they have taken 9 governorates as examples to see what are the actual needs, they are going to use the information that is found in the EITI report to see if the CSR actually money has gone and actually is going and is correlated to what the community actually needs. This is one way where we can use the information that is provided by the companies regarding CSR that is found in the EITI reports, and we can, as civil society, actively say whether the money that is being put back by the companies is actually put back in the proper place. You can go into community, say that, for example, Chevron has built 100 schools, but the community does not need 100 schools. They need sewage system, and this is where civil society can play a very important role. It should voice what the needs are for that community. This is our responsibility. We should not play it on anybody else. It's not the government's responsibility. It's nobody's responsibility. It's our responsibility to voice that.
Thank you. Please go ahead. Can we have a microphone?
My name is Najwa Andraus. I'm compliance and gender specialist in a USAID program. My question is, with respect to the specificities of the situation in Lebanon, very, the confrontational situation between the civil society and the existing government, the parliament, the fact that the decision makers and the policy makers in the country are the same beneficiary owners. I'm going to link this session to the session before that. So there's a major conflict of interest here. So they are the ones who decide who should be here and who should not be here, and how the money is, the dividends is going to be distributed. So to which extent, or what is the procedure where organizations like ITI or Publish What You Pay, who decides whether they could be here, they could operate, they could be active here or not? Is it the government, or they can just come? What's the role of the civil society in determining that these watchdog organizations could be here to protect the interests of the civil society? And another question is, what are the specific strategies that could be adopted by the civil society organizations to influence this process, to have their voices heard in this process, to make decisions in this process, because we have a very vibrant civil society. It's not that we are a complacent civil society here. At the same time, we all know how the situation of our government and the politics here. So have there been a similar case elsewhere in the world? And what could be done, when it comes to practical issues? So how can we support the civil society in certain strategies, specific strategies?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to take a few questions because let me just say I'm under a lot of pressure because we've exhausted our interpreters and obviously our time up. So I'm going to take a few questions and give the panelists a chance to, in fact, answer them, and then we can continue our conversation. Eugene, please.
I would like to ask Sami and Diana, are you frustrated? Are you optimistic? Or are you? When I look back at the discussion around the Boutros draft, which was very complicated, but not nearly as complicated as oil and natural gas, the main trump card in the government was that nobody really understood what the Boutros draft was about, and it was easy to mislead the public, and people were giving all kinds of information based on fallacies. Based on your own experience as civil society activists, how are we going to make it work this time? It hasn't worked well in the past when the topic is really complex. Civil marriage is simple, because this requires an incredible amount of endurance on the part of civil society players, and not just the researchers, but also the confrontational activists. How do you get them involved?
Right. Thanks. So please, gentlemen over there. Over there.
I just have a small question for the gentleman from UNDP and the lady from Publish What You Pay. We were talking about maybe the option of having CSR maybe enhance the partnership between the private sector and the civil society sector. And then that can contribute maybe to what you were mentioning as an example in Iraq, where it will just be a direct, you would probably be streamlining the transfer of information from the private sector and the civil society sector as to how to spend the revenues. Would that be a possibility or maybe a future step for CSR to look at? Or because, I mean, from what I learned or what you presented about CSR, it will all have to go back through the UNDP system and through maybe a small think tank. Eventually, could the later step be the direct movement from the private sector to the civil society sector and vice versa?
Thank you. Could you pass the microphone, please, to the gentleman? Yes.
Hi, this is Hassan Sharif from the Arab NGO Network for Development, and my question is for a friend from Mexico first. So I want to know, from your opinion, how much do you think that the oil and gas sector in Latin America in general and Mexico in particular has contributed to enhancing the local productive capacities and factors of production and to building the industrial base in Mexico and Latin America in general? And given your work on this specific sector in Mexico, how do you envisage the role of the oil and gas sector in development?
Please, over here.
I'm a journalist from Al-Akhbar newspaper. My question is, a few weeks ago, I covered an event in Izak League about oil and gas and petrol and how it is related to the market and how it's opened new opportunities for youth. So how would we link civil society, since I'm part of civil society also, civil society and companies and the government to academic studies and to have like more coordination with universities and using the tools and like the missing tools that you were passing through during the conference, like you can find them in universities. How can you do the collaboration, and why you didn't invite any person from USG or EB or Izak to talk about this issue, because it's very important.
Sure.
It's my opinion.
Great, thank you. Any more questions? All right, fine. Let's start with Phil, please.
Right. Let me respond to the question from the gentleman back there about CSR and sharing information. I think actually you hit the nail on the head there in responding to what Diana was saying, that sharing of information is incredibly powerful and it's something that should be continued. But our idea with trying to create a more structured framework to engage with CSR is to go maybe a little bit beyond that and actually provide an opportunity for different partners, including civil society, to actually directly influence how companies decide where to spend their CSR resources on. To follow up on what you were saying, the way the framework's been put together right now is still very much in discussion. So we certainly envisage that UNDP will play a secretarial role to help support the process. Whether that will ultimately lead to a situation where industry players provide money directly to civil society, I would certainly hope so. We're not expecting to have UNDP be a bottleneck in this process. But you're right, it's moving beyond just the sharing of information to having a platform through which there can be a collective decision on what the priority should be for CSR. That's the benefit we see in this process.
Yes, definitely, and I'd just like to add to my colleague's remark here is that the key word here is actually sharing of information. Again, you hit the nail on the head when you said, how do we share the information? It's a mechanism. We need to come up, the answer is not always there. We need to look at how others did it, and then we need to improvise to see how we can best share this information to, promote more sustainability, better use of all the revenues that are coming in. So I just wanted to add this point.
Thank you, Anna. Francisco.
To answer briefly, first your question about the specific strategies that must be pursued in Lebanon, I have no idea. The thing is, at least the small knowledge I have about Lebanon's political system, both formal and informal, it's one of the most complex countries that I've ever studied. So the thing is, I don't know. I think civil society organizations here have a much more knowledge about are closer to the pulse of what's happening in the country and know exactly what buttons to push, where to move, and which strategy to pursue. And it would be very difficult from the outside to make a recommendation. And as for the question about development, using oil and gas extraction as a strategy for development, to talk about the whole Latin American subcontinent as a single entity is very difficult because many countries are pursuing very different strategies. For example, countries such as these new progressive countries such as Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Brazil, even Uruguay and Argentina, they're using oil, gas and mineral extraction as these activities as a platform for acquiring revenue which they are spending in social